Joining me today, we have Treon Muller, Chief Strategy Architect at C.A.R.E Learning. He's going to tell you how learning got its bad rap and what to do about it. So without further ado, Treon, I will let you get started.
Thank you, Stephanie. And hello, folks. Glad to have you join us. I'm excited to talk about this approach. I think there's probably a few reasons why you might have joined. And one of them is I will be introducing you to a new learning effectiveness framework that I've been working on for 15 years and that addresses this problem. But let's get started. And I want you to put on some different lenses today. Oh, excuse me. I want you to think differently about learning today, even compared to just several years ago. And the objective for this, or the objectives for this webinar today, is to encourage you to reevaluate what you think about your learners, to rethink the space between where your learners are now and where they need to be. That's the space that we influence in this industry. And also to then consider redesigning your learning experiences with the C.A.R.E.S Learning Effectiveness Framework in mind, which we'll go over. So these are the three parts of that agenda that we'll go over today. We'll start with the first part, the rise of the mutant learner. In 2011, I co-authored a book called The Learning Explosion. And in it, we gave the definition. Basically, we put a learning lens or learning spin on this digital revolution we're part of. And basically what we're saying was the learning explosion is this perpetual, it's definitely an ongoing explosion of knowledge into these countless learning fragments. A prime example of this is when you Google something, well, no matter what it is, you'll get millions of results, right? So this is fueled by this ongoing technological advances, and it's resulting in this ongoing creation and worldwide distribution of new ideas, innovation, and education. I think that's important. I think we know this. It's not nothing that any of you don't know, but we wanted to name how this digital revolution was impacting and affecting learning specifically. And that's important because coming from this learning explosion, we have a new learning reality. Here's just some of the realities that we face. The community is now the new expert. It's no longer just the sage on the stage. And you have participated in the birth of the virtual classroom, which is interesting. When we wrote the book in 2011, when we would speak to audiences, we would ask for a raise of hands on who had attended the webinar, and there'd be about 10% of people that would maybe raise their hands. This is just 11 years ago. And then when we asked who had facilitated the webinar, maybe one or two people in the room would raise their hands. Obviously, that is completely flip-flopped today, partly because COVID was a catalyst to this movement. It was already happening, as in we're not throwing out the baby in the bathwater with ILT. What we're saying is there definitely has been more of a shift over the last decade or so or more towards virtual classroom and other digital learning experiences. Your mobile device is your new best friend forever. We know that. There's more info that we need, or we can even ever handle or organize. Video has emerged as the golden child. Millennials and the younger generations are influencing the world when it comes to learning. And AI is not quite there, especially when it comes to learning. We'll talk about that a little later, but AI is doing great things in other industries, but in learning, we haven't quite cracked the code yet on true AI, artificial intelligence. So keeping up will be impossible, and then free is getting better. The quality of free is getting better. So these are some new realities that we are facing as mutant learners. And I want to talk about that. You and I are mutant learners when we use technology and online tools to constantly learn, initiate, wonder, and create. And these mutant learners are the new generation and type of learner that we have. So in the book that I have coming out in October, we go into more detail about these. There's actually 5 types of mutant learners. One is a zombie. And you don't want to be a zombie. That's just someone that has no purpose, right? It's just wandering the online world. There's no real purpose in life. But there's other ways that we can contribute as mutant learners and that we are participating as mutant learners. And there's as a learner, which is a fundamental part of it, obviously, we are consuming information. Sometimes we initiators, where we initiate discussions, we ask the question of online groups, etc. Sometimes we're the creator, we create new content that we then distribute by learning fragments to the world online. And sometimes we are a wanderer, where we just like, I want to learn, but I'm going to kind of go where it takes me. There's a difference between a wanderer and a zombie. And that is that wanderers are contributors. They actually contribute to the discussion going on. But I won't go into much detail about that for now. But it's important to know that the learners that you are responsible for and the learner you probably are is a mutation of something that we are familiar with and comfortable with in the past, and it continues to mutate. So here's some symptoms to know if you are a mutant learner. You make time to grow or learn, even though you're busy, distracted, and overwhelmed. We do this in the seams of the day, right? You're not a clone. You don't like to be treated like one. You want an answer now, even if it isn't a complete one. And you want learning to be concise. You want the experience to look and feel good. That is thanks to social media and all the other wonderful online tools we partake of, like YouTube, where we are used to things looking, at least being presented in a decent fashion. You don't want any extras. Don't give me the bells and whistles. Just give me what I'm asking for. And you love to be entertained. This goes with the videos, but we generally are more conditioned for entertainment. You want to choose your own learning adventure, this goes along with being a clone, and you'll continue to adapt or mutate how you learn. So one thing I failed to do at the beginning was just introduce a little bit about myself. I'm originally from South Africa, hence the strange name and strange accent. I've been here for quite a while, so my accent has it's not so strong anymore. I've been in this learning and development space for 20 years. I have a master's in instructional technology and learning science, and currently a PhD student in the same space. But I've been testing my own models and theories over the last 20 years in this space, and finally writing the book after so many years of writing it, finally getting it out. So I think it'll be important to know that my background is in the space, working especially with some of the global leaders in learning and development. So I have a great love for changing behavior. So that's the rise of the mutant learner. I just wanted to make sure we started to recognize that it's no longer, we're not the same anymore, partly because of this learning explosion, this digital revolution, the advanced technologies, everything going on. The second part I want to talk about is the space between. If I were to ask you what's the ultimate purpose of training or learning and development, you'd probably respond with something like this. It's to take your learners, wherever they are with regards to skills, behaviors, their proficiencies, certifications, competencies, where they are now, and take them from A to B to where they need to be in order to do their jobs better and ultimately positively impact business results. That's the ideal. That's the misnomer when we talk about return on investment, right? We want to be able to get to that B and be able to show it with the right metrics. So that is one very fundamental and basic definition of, if you ask, what's the purpose of training? I would say it's to get your employees from A to B. And obviously there's more nuances and specificities based on your organization and what you're trying to do. So the question is, the key is the space between A and B. So what's the best way to teach, to train, to test, and to try your unique learners so that when they get to the other side, they truly can, they have shown proficiency changes, they have behavior change that is impacting business results. So here's something I call the 10 dimensions of learning as of 2022, because as I said before, things continuously change. Think of these as categories. I like it as dimensional because, for example, live online instruction like we're doing today, it's very much a talking head with a PowerPoint heavy presentation. It's not the ideal way I like to do live online instruction. I've created a model in the book, The Learning Explosion, and the follow-up book we created called the Virtual Accountability Model. So there's no one way to do, webinars, virtual classrooms, or live online instruction. It's dimensional, and it also depends on what you're trying to do. What is the objective and the goal to what that is? But here's some general 10 dimensions and categories that I believe we now have at our disposal in some form or fashion. You'll recognize most of them. The only thing I want to talk about is there's two AIs, version 1 and version 2. AI is adaptive intelligence. I think we are there. I think we're doing a decent job where technology is allowing us to, when someone comes in, when I come in, as opposed to when Stephanie comes into a learning experience, based on what I'm trying to do and how I answer and how I interact with my experience, I'll be led down a different branch than Stephanie would. And so that's not something that's also brand new, but I think technology is getting better at helping us do that. Where we're not quite there yet is that artificial intelligence, where the system and the technology is actually thinking for us and anticipating for us what it is we need to do. But it is important to know that these are things that we currently can play with to get us from A to B. And this is the space between. There are 4 observations I want to make about these 10 dimensions of learning in the space between, right? The first thing is in-person instruction, ILT, has been the default and only real option we've had for centuries. I mean, we can go back as long as we can remember and think about these masters or sages who would have apprenticeships or mentees, and they would have students. And it was very much a hands-on experience. It was an expert, a master, instructing their students. So that has been the default up until literally a dozen or so years ago, where we now have other options. So I also want to make a point that there's no one right way or combination or sequence or solution. When it comes to what you do in the space between, it really does depend on your job to be done, on the objectives you're trying to accomplish, on the learners that you're dealing with. So that's a second observation. The third one is, as opposed to this ILT or in-person training that's been around for centuries, the other 9 catalysts or dimensions have only been around for a couple of decades. Now, I know in some form or fashion, some of these things have been around longer, but I'm talking about really in use, like where we've had access to it en masse. Now, I'm not talking about all the innovation stages beforehand. I'm talking after we've crossed the chasm, where now we have a majority of people using any and all of the above. The fourth observation I think is interesting. Both the ILT and AI, true artificial intelligence approaches, have the ability to personalize and adjust the learning experience to the one. None of the other ones do a great job of that. All the other ones typically force us as instructional designers or learning and development professionals to build a learning experience that can be consumed, the same one, by many people. And it's the same experience. It's kind of the cloning effect. But so it's interesting, we're coming full circle when we finally get to this place where AI is now saying, oh, Treon, you really need this because of these other triggers that you have that we've seen you pull, and the technology is going to anticipate, like a mentor, a master would do in a traditional sense, where it's like, okay, it looks like you're having trouble with this experiment. I'm going to come hands-on and give you that help. So some interesting things that we need to do, that we can do with the space between. And here's just a summary of those 4 observations. The key point I want to make is don't default in the space between. The default setting for us sometimes is very easy because it's, in the past it was proven, but again, we've changed. The mutant learner no longer wants to be treated like a clone. The mutant learner wants things in the way he or she likes to consume information. So we've got to think differently about how we create this experience to get someone from A to B. Please don't default by creating 1-hour webinars, 1-hour click-through e-learning experiences, a day in person where it might be instructionally designed quite well where there's practice and there's ways to go through the content, but it's still a fire hose event. It's a default setting, and it doesn't work. It never has, to be honest with you. Especially as the classes have grown. It's worked when there was the true sage on the stage and students, and there was a manageable amount of people that they could influence and instruct. But as we get to bigger classrooms and we go online, like we are here, it's very hard for me to influence you individually. So I want to keep in mind, we have to reevaluate and think, what are we doing in the space between? There's lots of options, and each of our options are going to be different. Our solutions to our challenges are going to be different based on our needs and what we need to do. And that brings up this point, right? This last section, I want to talk about the C.A.R.E.S Learning Effectiveness Framework. So why does no one care about your training? Well, it assumes I don't have other things to do. And I'll show you what I mean by that. It treats me like a clone. It doesn't answer my questions or training needs. It gives me more than I need, right? It's too long. It looks like crap. I'm sure you guys can relate to some of the training that we have and that you've seen. It just doesn't look very good. And that, by the way, is demotivating and does not help a learner in any way. It comes with unnecessary bells and whistles, as I mentioned, is boring, is linear, predictable, and prescribed. And here's the last point that really is a mutant learning trait. It doesn't meet me where I am, with what I need, in the format I want, and at the time I need it. So here's how we think that training is being consumed in our organizations with our employees. We build it, and they're going to have it front and center because we tell them that they need to do it. Here's the reality. The reality is there's lots on their plate. There's lots going on. There's distractions. There's noises. There's Slack and email. There's their day job. There's fires. There's so many things happening that, yes, they have learning and development as one of the things, but it's because of the way we've positioned it and framed it and set it up, it feels like it's compartmentalized. It is something I've got to go do as an assignment or a task, as opposed to something I want to do or something that's going to help me do my job better. So what can we do about it? Here's where I talk about the importance of, in this space, the learning space, we often butt heads between two groups, researchers and then the practitioners. And you guys know what I'm talking about. There's the research, which I'm part of right now as well, but I've been a practitioner for 20 years. And I'm starting to realize that, and this is nothing new, in the research we read about, even going back to Piaget, talking about the importance that we have to bridge this gap between what is our objectives as a researcher, or in our case, as L&D professionals. We have objectives, right? We call it learning objectives when we build a training experience. We want the learner to be able to do these 5 things. That's important, and we still need to have that. We have to now also balance that with the learner's reality. Think about this. Why, if we have a courier that is out delivering packages for us in our company, why would we build a learning experience on a laptop? Especially if they have a device that they can use to access learning while they're traveling, not while they're driving, but in the scenes where they have a question, they can stop and just in time get answers to their questions. So that's just one very elementary example, but it's important that we balance. I think sometimes we do a great job on objectives, but we don't always take into account the user experience. I have a background in product management, being a chief product officer in this edtech space for many years. And it's helped me to put the user or the learner at the center of everything that we do. And that brings up the C.A.R.E.S Learning Effectiveness Framework. So if you take a look at this on the left, that's me showing the user or the learner is central to this learning experiences that we create. So the acronym stands for content. I know there's more than one letter word applied to some of them, but they go hand in hand, and that's what I want to share with you. Content is essential. It's something that we have, and I'll go over what we mean by that. It's application, accountability, reflection, routines, and reinforcement, evaluation, and socialization and sharing. The goal is to get to behavior change with learning, right? From A to B, where they have proficiency, a new skill set. So to get them there, we have to include learning experiences that have as much of these components in them as possible. The more we can include these components into our design and our delivery, the more chance we have of behavior change. So let me explain what I mean by all of these. So as I do this, I want you to think of a learning experience, something that you have designed or created in your company, or something you have purchased like LinkedIn or Masterclass. And then answer the following C.A.R.E.S questions with that experience in mind. That will help actually give you a much clearer understanding of this concept and this framework. The nice thing about this framework, guys, is that it's not replacing what your instructional designers are doing. Instead, it's an and. It's giving them a framework to work within. So let me show you what I mean. We're going to start with the learner, the user experience. You want to ask yourself, what are the on-the-job realities, challenges, expectations, and goals of our target learner? And how will this learning experience that I'm creating help them on their journey to behavior change? This is something we do well in the marketing world. We create personas, it's called. Sometimes we don't do a great job in the learning space. I think it helps to have a persona. If we're dealing with sales training, let's understand who our salesperson is. What is their on-the-job reality, their challenges, expectations, etc. So that's a good question you want to ask yourself first. You want to start there. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark. The first thing we're going to talk about with the C.A.R.E.S is content. So do you have the subject matter and or access to the subject matter expert? And how have you designed the content with your unique learner, that we just spoke about that, in mind? That's regarding modality, their experiences, and what type of activities. Now, we do a good job in the industry in general with content. So when it comes to the C.A.R.E.S effectiveness framework, we do a very good job with C. But as you can see from my model diagram, it's C by itself is not going to change behavior. It's still quite a far away. You're just offloading content and information. And you might be doing it in a great instructional design way. You might even have practice built in there. And that's where I would put practice, by the way, is under content, because we instructionally design an experience where we teach someone something. We give them examples. We maybe have them observe something in a video format, or we have them practice with groups. And that's fine. It's all part of the process, but it's still content curation. It's still content delivery, content fire hosing. So if you do that, now let's think of Masterclass. I actually really like Masterclass, and I think the quality of their content is probably 10 out of 10, because they have the right subject matter experts. They have very interesting videos, well-produced, high quality, so that they have that. They do a great job with C. But now let's move on and look at application and accountability. Now, these two can only succeed together, because how many times in our training content space do we gesture to application? We'll say things like, here's a 7-week action plan or application program. Now, you've learned what you need to do. Now go do it. Good luck. And maybe we have a little bit of a follow-up, and that's where accountability comes in. We have to have a means for them to now be accountable to someone, to a group, a cohort, to a coach, to a boss, a mentor, to other peers, and be held accountable to that action plan. So it's adding this extra A in order to get closer to behavior change. That's very important. So how do you provide real-world application opportunities for your learners in this learning experience? Now, just so you know, I'm a big believer that learning does not take place in one-and-done fire hose events. It never has. I want to give you an example. If anyone has been a concert pianist or a professional sportsman or professional musician or any other profession that requires expertise, I want to ask you this. Did you learn it by going to a week-long session at a piano camp? And all you did all day for a week long was play piano, and now you were a concert pianist? We all know the answer to that. It applies to tennis. It applies to guitar. It applies to leadership. You cannot become a great leader after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, 2 weeks of being immersed and fire hosed with leadership principles. You need time in between to practice like you would a guitar chords. You practice a few, you go back to your mentor, your coach, your your teacher and say, here's what I have, how am I doing? And they would help correct anything that's wrong. And then say, let me teach you the next step. It's how we as humans have always worked. If you look at learning theory, if you look at constructivism, behaviorism, cognitivism, they all of those areas focus on the importance of learning things in some kind of a sequence, building upon one another. And obviously, they have different approaches to that, but that's how we learn. So why I'm talking about application accountability is you want time in between for people to apply the one or two principles they've learned and be accountable to someone to that before they move on to the next ones, so that they continue to add to that schema, that experience that they're learning. Oops, not yet. And how are learners held accountable for those application attempts? You also, and by the way, it's important to call out the wins and the fails and to celebrate both. So the R, this is very key, I believe. You can build a learning experience, but it should include some form of reflection, the ability for routines to take place, and reinforcement. So for reflection, how do you build in time learners? Building time for learners to reflect on how they are doing with the new skills that they've just learned and how it relates to their specific responsibilities. You want it to become relevant. We can put another R in there, but reflection is like, for me personally, how can I apply what I've learned to my specific example, my specific situation? And you need to build those opportunities in for reflection. You also have to build in opportunities for learners to create daily and weekly on-the-job routines using the new skills they've learned. It's no use teaching them something new and you don't facilitate that with some kind of a, daily check-in. Okay, here's the checklist of things I have to do today, and I'm going to go through this because I've learned how to do this. Now, this is facilitating my daily routine. Build in opportunities for people to now make that idea, that concept, the principle and skill a part of their daily life. And then we all know this. We know the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve teaches us that if you fire someone with information, they're going to forget most of it within a month. And then after a year, it's like up to 95% lost. So after initial training event, which I'm hoping is not an event, more space learning, how do you give your learners the opportunity to receive intentional reinforcement triggers, not just quote of the day stuff? I'm talking about reinforcement on key principles that is having them think differently about those principles, maybe in certain cases, case studies, or difficult questions, complex ideas that they have to now apply what they've learned to that. I think that's very important. We all do this in some form or fashion as well. I think we do a decent job with content and with evaluation. How do you evaluate the efficacy of your learning experience? What do you do? How do you do it? And when do you do it? And there's a difference between what and how, by the way, because you want to know, you want to spend time in breaking down. You have the what, which is the tool that you're using, technology or live, but the how is, how do you as a team then go into that? Is it something you've scheduled, but you want to make sure it's also part of your routine if you're an L&D professional responsible for other mutant learners. And that's why evaluation, we generally in this industry do a good job with content and evaluation. And then we kind of hit and miss on the other areas, which brings up the last one as part of the C.A.R.E.S framework, socialization and sharing. So how can learners socialize best practices, watch outs, tips, and other insights with the community? And without a forced community, I'm assuming most companies have some kind of an intranet, some kind of a internal communities that they use already. It's important to go where people are already, but you want to be able to then facilitate the opportunities for them to socialize those things. And you also want to, how can learners share the success or failure of their attempted application of those principles with a coach, peer group, and or community? So the difference is there is to focus on the wins and fails, reward that, celebrate that. And then lastly, how can learners who have mastered a skill in the past, part of a cohort, it's part of this group, this community, how can they now be engaged to be a mentor or coach for future experiences? When we do stuff like this, not only do our cultures change, but those folks that become the coaches, they grow with experience, and then they train other people. It becomes a great model to follow. And that's how the more you can incorporate these elements, all of the CARES elements into your learning experience design, the more chance you have of behavior change. I did want to mention something though. The way I do this when I work with clients is I ask them to break down their learning experience. Let me go up here quickly. I'll ask them to break down their learning experience that they currently have into its smallest standalone pieces. So we call this chunking, bite-sizing, micro-learning, whatever you want to call it. You do that first because you have the content, right? You probably have it broken up in chapters already, maybe in an e-learning, or you have it in sections in your live or virtual classroom training. So you pretty much chunked your content, but break it down into its smallest standalone pieces. Because then you say, okay, what is the ideal modality for my learner to teach just this one micro module? Oh, maybe it's just a video that is instruction. So maybe it is just content. Or maybe it's instruction on how to apply it with an example and building in an accountability check-in that will happen later in a week. So these micro modules, one thing that you'll find when you do this, you don't want to force anything with instructional design. So you don't want to force every micro module to have all of the CARES components in it. But you want to make sure that you go where the content leads you, where it's natural. So that when you finish creating the experience and you find these ideal different types of learning modalities, those 10 dimensions I mentioned, like what is the best dimension to use for one of those modules, then you also attach which part of the CARES Learning Effectiveness Framework goes alongside each module. That allows you, with that spreadsheet, that allows you to quickly take a look at the experience as a whole for your learner, and also to see if you are truly impacting their effectiveness with these CARES components, because you might find that you're missing a reflection component, and you might think that's important. We need to have that. So that's one thing I want to say to make this happen, is to break it up into these micro modules, identify what is the right type of learning dimension you want to have with that, and then also attach which one of the CARES components, 1 or 2 or 3, apply to that module by itself. Then you can quickly evaluate what chance you have for this being an effective learning experience or not. You can always then change things around. There are times when your content that you're providing is purely content. It's information sharing, and that's all you want to do and check a box, and that's fine. This is for those times we want behavior change. We want to meet certain competencies, certain skill sets. We want to change behavior. I give an example of compliance. So with compliance, it's a lot of content, right? We want people to understand the laws, what's accepted, what's not accepted in the workplace, with various things. Sexual harassment, diversity and inclusion. There's things that are law, right? We have to complete that. So that's a lot of content. Notice there's not a lot of application or accountability. There might be some reflection that's happening implicitly, but not necessarily explicitly built into the experience. There's no routines or reinforcement, and evaluation. The only evaluation we do is they've completed it, so we can now meet the compliance checkbox. And there's no socialization sharing of that for a lot of reasons. But my thinking is, why not create an and? You have the compliance training. Why not build in an and using community to talk about certain general things, or to share good experiences? I don't want to go into that's a controversial topic, but my point is, if you just want to share content and information, you don't need to go through this C.A.R.E.S Learning Effectiveness Framework, because you don't want behavior change. You just want to check a box. So about to wrap up, and then we'll go to some Q&A. So the power of the C.A.R.E.S Learning Effectiveness Framework is that it harnesses the benefits we now have with technologies and all the innovation that comes along with it. We have that. For the first time in the history of the world, we have technology that can meet us and help us do things like never before. It also draws upon what we know about behavior, cognitive psychology, and adult learning. It keeps the modern learner, the digital native consumer of information, whatever you want to call us, mutant learner, at the forefront of the user experience. and it helps evaluate the current learning experiences and offerings that we have for efficacy, and to see what the likelihood is that those learners that we created this for will achieve the desired behavior change and or skill proficiency that's needed. And it addresses the reasons why no one cares about your training, because now there's a reason for them to go through it. It's something that'll guide them, something they will enjoy. So I know we've been speeding through this. I want to leave a lot of time to go to Q&A, because some of the best things that happen is when we can go through questions and answers. So I am done with my informational content part of it. Let's get into some more reflection and questioning.
All right, thank you so much, Tran. So everyone, let's put those questions in the Q&A panel to make sure that we see them. We do have one, and we get this a lot when we're talking about changing things up and doing different learning modalities. What are your top recommendations for how to get stakeholder buy-in when you want to try a new learning modality or a new approach? And, sometimes you have the old guard who's a little resistant to change. They're like, our formal training's fine, we don't need to change it. How do you kind of bring them around to a new way of thinking?
That is actually a very real challenge I think we have. A lot of the time it's because training is seen in a silo. It's seen as something we do because we have to do it, as opposed to, that's why I don't like the term training. There's a lot of negative baggage with the term training. I recommend all of you that you start using terms like learning experience or development, personal development, employee development, and even attach employee retention and engagement to development, because those are metrics that the business leaders understand. Because retention, with the great resignation, it costs money to train someone to do any job. It costs money to recruit people, to hire them, to train them. So I would always attach every initiative that you're thinking of doing, new idea, to business metrics. So find what those metrics are where you are hurting the most, then create the space between and say to them, we want to go from 20% attrition rate to 10%. And the way to do that, the space between, is personal development. And here's the best way we feel to do that. So you come prepared to show something. Here's the cool things that we do at ELB Learning is we help you build proof of concepts that you can showcase to your bosses or those decision makers. Even if it's not your content yet, it'll have your content labels. It'll look like your brand. It'll look like your product, but it'll have other examples of top-notch virtual reality, if that's something that you think is part of the space between. So what I'm saying is, find ways to, instead of telling them a concept, show them a working prototype or proof of concept with the WIFM, the what's in it for me, which is the business benefit to retention. It's improving our organizational culture, because people go to onboarding. Most onboarding things suck. I'm sorry, I don't use the S word a lot, but it really does suck. So people, that's the first indication your employee has of your culture, is your onboarding experience. And they go, oh my goodness, what I get myself into? So, it doesn't have to be that way. Create something cool in the space between them not being an employee and them being an employee. What do they need to know? How can they access it? What's a cool way for them to see that and experience that? So you have a proof of concept. So you're not just telling, Stephanie, you're showing. Educate your decision makers on the value of it based on business metrics. So those are some ideas.
That was a perfect answer that also answered our next question, because the next question was, what KPIs should you be looking at to analyze the effectiveness of your training? So I think you kind of touched on that a little bit in your first answer, but do you have anything else that you want to say about that?
Yeah, I love that you're mentioning it, because when training, in quotations, is thought of as this is get this done because we have to, and it's not tied to KPIs, then it's going to fail every time. And fail is different definition of failure. You're not going to get behavior change. You're not going to get buy-in. You're not going to get excitement, engagement around it. That's what I mean by failure. So your KPIs are going to be different than anyone else's. Every organization has got different KPIs. I would find ways. Remember, we're working with technology here for the most part. Now, I know some people still do, virtual instructor-led training and instructor-led training. But even with both of those, you can incorporate the technology part of it for evaluation or reflection, so that you can point them to something and show that there's improvement over time. So get a benchmark idea of where they are now. And then in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, do the next assessment to survey or assess their proficiency in something. I can promise you this, right now, most people have no metrics with regards to training, as in the only thing they have is completion. But what is hard to show is this ROI, this return on investment, this improvement. How has someone changed? So guess what you do? You remember the learning objectives? You attach the learning objectives and you find the technology that can measure that. As in, even if it's a survey you send out, even if it's subjective, in 6 months from now, if you do training today, and you have a survey in 6 months from now, and the person scores high on that survey, it is so much better proof of return on investment than what you have today, which is just, they completed the training, so they should be good. So you can start as small as that, where it's just an assessment after time period to see if they still remember things, or even subjectively, if they say they still remember it, whatever the case may be, their minds are still on it. But there's better ways we can do it with technology. If we know what our KPIs are and how our learning objectives obviously connect to those KPIs, and then you say what technology can help facilitate that connection. It's not easy because everyone does it differently. But if try to break it down into those components, what's the KPI we want to measure? What is the learning objective that meets that? And then thirdly, how do we use technology to connect those two?
Awesome. Great answer. And then speaking of technology, could you give us a little sneak peek into, during your conversations with clients and companies, what are kind of the top technologies that people are interested in right now? Is it VR? Is it games? Give us some behind the scenes insider info here.
Well, the truth of it is, so there is a renewed energy around some of the cooler new stuff. So let me start with what people aren't super excited about. And I think you all know the answer. It's a 4-letter word that's actually a 3-letter acronym. It's LMS, right? People don't love the LMSs, never have. And that's because it's just a dump of content. If you go back to my C.A.R.E.S Learning Effectiveness Framework, you just delivering content and you're expecting the user to be self-motivated or motivated by fear because they have to do it, to go on and click through a very boring e-learning experience that only is giving information and maybe some practice, some drag and drop, some really weird techniques. There's some things, just so you know, there's some things I believe we should never have in learning, and that's bells and whistles that don't help. So that's what people aren't excited about. We've accepted it and that we need it for various reasons. People are moving to more learning experience platforms because there's more that you can do with that to improve the user experience and the user interface. Again, product learning experiences. When I'm speaking to people, what they get excited about is how do we help people truly apply or in a safe learning environment. So we have this great rapid authoring tool called Scenario VR. Excuse me. When we used to say virtual reality in the past, people think hundreds of thousands of dollars for like a 10 to 12 virtual reality courses. Now, that's still accurate because building an experience in virtual reality with a headset that's 6 degrees of freedom, which is meaning you really in a different world, is expensive. And we do that as well. But with this rapid authoring tool, Scenario VR, we can create learning experiences for people that are 3 degrees of freedom, doesn't require a headset, can be built and published for any device, And it's easy. If you can author in Captivate, in Storyline, in Lectora, you can author in the scenario of VR. So people are very excited for what you could do. I've met with some clients where they have huge machinery on the floor. So as part of training someone on their machine, they have to stop production on the line, which, guess what? It costs the company money to stop the production on a factory line. And someone has to go in and do a test and see if they clicked all the things in the right order. And then they start it up again. So guess what we've done for clients? We've taken those exact machines and we've created an interactive experience where they can learn and fail in a safe environment so that when they do get on the floor, they know exactly what to do and there's less time needed to close production. So that's just one product. People love gamification. It's just buzzword is another one. Be careful about that. We have both games, e-learning games. We're the only company that has the right from Sony to use Jeopardy and the Wheel of Fortune. So, it's plug and play. You put your content in question format with an answer using images, video, whatever you want into our games like Jeopardy, and it becomes your own. But there's also gamification. And if you look at gamification, this is one of the areas I'm studying. It's taking game elements and using it as part of a learning experience. So when you look at gamification, you think more in terms of, okay, how are you incentivizing, motivating, or rewarding someone to progress through different layers or stages in their learning journey? So we have this amazing gamification platform. It's called the Arcades is the name of the product. And you can go in, there's a leaderboard, you can challenge other people to games. There's badges, there's rewards. Companies can put their own rewards in, like Amazon gift cards or swag. So those are things that people are really excited about. One other thing I want to mention that's different than what most people have, right? And we purchased a company called Rehearsal. And Rehearsal allows for video-based practice and coaching. So it's very slick. It's very simple to use. You record a video of yourself, you send it to your employee, and with instructions on what they need to do, they record themselves, maybe practicing the elevator pitch, and they send it back to you, or AI can score how well they did on their elevator pitch. So those are three of the top products and learning ed tech that people are super excited about, that they can put in with what they already have, Stephanie. So the nice thing about that is you're not asking them to uproot the existing LMS, which most people don't like, but all the things I mentioned can be SCORM wrapped and dropped into someone's LMS. So
that's great. So you can kind of build on your existing ecosystem and still be able to take advantage of those cool, new, innovative technologies.
Yep.
I think that is all the questions we have right now. If anyone wants to pop a last minute one in, type quickly. Otherwise, thank you so much, Trian, for sharing all of this today.